Okay, now let's look at the results from this. In order to do so, we have to look at the 5 items. Okay. Um, we'll refer to these little keys in a second, but let me read the sentences to you, questions to you. Who did the teacher suspect had taken what? And when did Henry remember when Louise had lost what? Right? So when did he remember, as in when was the remembering happening, or when had she lost whatever she lost? Okay. Now A and B are both supposed to be fine. You'll notice that in A, the interpretation that should be good is the matrix interpretation because there's movement. And so if I was a native speaker and my choices were essentially a matrix scope answer or an embedded scope answer, I should always pick the matrix scope answer. With regards to B, however, I could easily pick either because it's ambiguous. So if I went 50-50, in this case, remember they're choosing all of the ones that are good, so I should accept both 100%. Now C, if you look above, mentions should violate attract closest, aka violate superiority. This is what we saw before. Who did Sophie's brother warn Sophie would telephone when? And here, the who should have matrix scope, but not embedded scope because it's moved and it's an argument. So if, as a native speaker, I should say yes 100% of the time to the matrix and 0 to the embedded. Now D, if you see my key above, has a subjacency violation. It's an extraction from an island. To understand that, you should see that the embedded clause is headed by who. So who has been moved up. But you can't extract out of something that's headed by who. So it would be a subjacency violation to yank something over that border. So the only interpretation of the matrix WH when is, well, matrix scope because it can't have come from the lower clause without violating subjacency. So if I interpret when as when they met, when did Rupert discover who Nora had met when? If I interpreted that as when they met, that would be a subjacency violation. So as a native speaker, once again, I should be picking matrix 100% here and 0% embedded. And finally, E, for kicks and giggles, I guess, the authors mixed them, and there should be both. Now, once again, you see that there's a WH heading, the embedded clause, so any other WH couldn't have come from the embedded clause because it can't get past that point. Remember, if C has already attracted something, a second thing can't move through there. So, again, we only have the matrix scoped. That makes any sense here. So who did the weather office warn when the hurricane might strike? Weather office, as in the office that studies weather, I guess. And so it has to be who was warned. It can't be who was struck. Okay? Because who can't get past when. It also would be a superiority violation because you wouldn't expect when to move before who. Okay. So here is our data. So as I said, what they had to do is say yes or no to all of them. So what I'm reporting here is percent acceptance of embedded scope because the prediction for the natives is very strong. As I said, A and B should be good to a native speaker, which is what we see. Although, because B is ambiguous, it's not 100% that they accepted it. They kind of went, sometimes I like embedded scope, I guess, just as much or more. However, C and D and E, which have violation, or 2 violations, once we get down to 0%, they're really low, right? So we have 33% acceptance of embedded scope for C, 21% in D, and nothing in E. Okay, so my question was, what about the second language learners? What do they know? And so my other column, my left column, are my JSEs. So A and B should be fine, and that's what we see. In fact, they're quite a lot like the native speakers in A and B. 96 versus 97, 78 versus 75. I'm seeing a lot of similarity there. However, when we introduce the superiority violation in C, the natives drop a lot to 33%, but the L2s, the JSEs, are performing pretty similar with and without that superiority violation, right? Even though they're supposed to attract closer, there's no distinction. They're treating who and when equivalently. They're not that the distinction between argument and adjunct there is irrelevant to them. It's really interesting. Now, once we introduce island violations, island extractions, right, in D and E, the JSEs do drop a bit to like 50-50. They must not be particularly sure. That's usually what you get is kind of with an L2 who's not sure. Maybe that's bad, I don't know, right? But it's not 0. And if you look at these little stars in between the columns, the little star means that the groups were significantly different for that item type. And as is not particularly surprising, C, D, and E, the non-natives, the JSEs, accepted these guys significantly more than the native speakers. So, remember, I said, if we acquire WH movement, do we get everything that comes with it? Does this mean we don't? How did Hawkins and Hattori account for this lack of superiority and subjacency in these JSEs? How are they accounting for that? And in fact, what they propose is they haven't acquired this strong WH feature, the one that forces movement. In fact, what they would say is that when you do see movement, they're actually using focus. Because Japanese, like ASL, is a topicalization language. They're topic, 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 topic. And instead of marking them with a subject particle, they mark them with a topic marker. So instead of John Ga, it would be John Wa. Right? So when we're seeing movement, they're saying actually it's into focus P. It's not into CP. Which is kind of close in the hierarchy, but it's a different phrase and has different features. And so focus P doesn't have the same distance when we're talking about attract closer. Doesn't have the same constraints. So this is their proposal for why that would be. So here's a summary. Ready? Learning features or phenomena in a second language does involve resetting parameters that were transferred from the L1. And for Japanese learners of English, they would transfer their weak WH from their Japanese, which means they wouldn't have movements of WH, the initial state of English. So what they need to do is acquire a strong WH, something that triggers movement in their English. But, even when participants show what looks like movement in their L2 English, we saw some data that they're not behaving native-like in certain respects. They have extractions from islands. They are not using attract closer in the way we would expect. And the proposal that we can have is not that we can't reset parameters or that the feature doesn't do what we think it is. Potentially, it's just that they're hijacking a feature that already exists in their L1. They don't have to acquire a new feature in this way. And actually, there are certain second language theories, transition theories now, that would say that you have trouble acquiring uninterpretable features that don't exist in your first language. And in fact, Hawkins, of Hawkins and Hattori, is one of these people. His Hawkins and Chan 97 paper is central to those types of claims, and it evolved and evolved and evolved and still has versions today. All right, well, that's the end of part 1. The references are on this slide. Send me questions if you have any concerns, and we'll see each other next week.